what are some of the issues that are really causing a lot of dissatisfaction and unhappiness among the electorate, among the voters in Singapore? Instead of only looking at symptoms, we must have a higher level perspective to look all the way to the root cause. And this kind of root cause are issues that can last for tens of years in decades. Because if we only look at symptoms, we can look at symptoms like higher cost of living in general, high property prices, high HDB prices, high COE prices. So we must really understand, because these are just symptoms. Symptoms means it's like your body is having certain symptoms, but if the doctor can only deal with the symptoms, but if you don't go and deal with the root cause, then the symptoms are going to keep coming back and you are not really solving the problem. So for example, symptoms like there is a lot of pressure on cost of living and all of these, we have to understand from a higher level perspective the historical view about how the Singapore economy and the governance was like. This is a extract from this important chapter of this book called Can Singapore Survive, that is written by my idol, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore for over 30 years, and he has provided very important perspectives. So this book called Can Singapore Survive is a collection of essays which he has looked at. He has written some of these letters to Straits Times in over a number of years, from 2015 onwards. Not 2015 onwards, from as early as the 1990s, as early as 1999, he wrote all these articles compiled into a book, was published in 2015. So one of my regret is that I did not read this book earlier when it was published. I should have understand both international geopolitics, what is shaping our environment, and also the domestic issue much earlier, 10 years ago. Then I will be able to have even more foresight than today to see the world and also to see Singapore. So some of the extract from this book says is that when Singapore first in the 1959 became self-governance under Lee Kuan Yew, Dr. Goh Keng Swee and S. Jayaratnam, Singapore was clearly left of center. Left of center means that while we are somewhat in the center, we promote economic growth, but excessive capitalism and the effects of excessive capitalism was much more stronger. There was more stronger measures against excessive capitalism, and there are more stronger measures to distribute the effects of economic growth. So, for example, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, or even the 1980s, we always talk about HDB flats, right? Why they are being priced at as low as 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 60,000. Of course, we do not go and, before even factoring the inflation and all of these issues, before we even factor the inflation, let us not overlook the fact is that one distinction which we must make is that in the years of 1970s, the 1980s, at that time, at least for the HDB flats, it is still aggressively built by the Singapore government, and they are being sold directly from government to the people. That was way before the concept of BTO. And we must not forget that in the 1970s and 1980s, the amount of foreign capital that is influencing our property prices is way much lesser. No? That is different from today. That is one distinction which I think a lot of us as Singaporeans, we must understand. Because capital flow was not as so easy to move money in and out of Singapore. There was not so much foreign capital influence in 1970s, 1980s as compared to today. In the 1980s, there was a revolution in the Western world. It is called the Reagan-Thatcher Revolution. Ronald Reagan is a US president who distrusted strong government. So basically, there's one very famous phrase that he said. He said that government is not the solution. Government is the problem. So Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they distrusted strong socialist governments because they were dealing with a lot of socialist excesses in the UK, Europe, and also the US. Basically, moving from a policy of so-called left of center towards right of center is a policy where the rich is allowed to get more richer, believing that although inequality will rise, but the poor will get richer too. That means the whole tide is being moved up. Everything will be lifted up. That is the belief of the so-called the change in terms of the influence of policy from so-called left of center to right of center. And as you can see here, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who has worked very closely with our founding ministers, our founding fathers, said he knows firsthand how much some of our founding fathers disapprove of the concept of gated community. So this is proof that probably since the 1980s, policy in Singapore also changed from left of center to right of center. And also notice that Professor have also shared in his book, he said that we now live in a time when it's becoming increasingly clear that the Reagan-Thatcher revolution of moving from so-called left of center to right of center has kind of gone too far.